She went to one of the most prestigious colleges in the country, was terrified to tell her parents what she actually wanted to study, fear of their disapproval. But the one sentence she received shaped her life forever. Today's guest, Natalie Nixon, didn't just follow a career path that was linear. She followed curiosity and creativity. I genuinely believe you're going to love her story. I recently sat on a panel with Natalie a few months ago and was blown away by her mission and her work. From studying anthropology at Vassar to working abroad in fashion to becoming a professor in academia, every chapter of her journey felt real and intentional until she hit a breaking point and began to burn out. Natalie got vulnerable and shared with me how she could no longer ignore the warning signs, so she walked away. And she launched her own business called Figure 8 Thinking, which helps leaders build what she calls creativity competence. Along the way, she realized something I think a lot of you will relate to, that productivity isn't about doing more. It's about knowing when to move, when to think, and when to rest. This is a real conversation about nonlinear career paths, redefining success, and trusting that the dots will eventually connect, even when they don't make sense in the moment. So without further ado, please enjoy Natalie Nixon and her clocking out journey. Hi, Natalie. Welcome to the podcast. It's nice to see you.
Hi, Raymond. Good to see you again. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. Natalie, I am so delighted to have this conversation. And we were just chatting. It's been 3 months since you and I first met, but we were on a panel together here in Philadelphia for a program called Building While Flying. And so one thing that I'll share with you is when you and I met, I know that you had launched your new book, and I picked up this little card that you had brought for people to take with them. This has been sitting on my desk for the last 3 months.
Okay. Well, hopefully it's been a colorful addition to your desk.
It has. Well, I will tell you so a couple of things. One is I love the three words: move, think, and rest. And it's done two things. One is it's sort of always acted as a reminder for me that,
Nice.
I'm moving and thinking, but I need to take time to rest.
Yes.
And part of the resting is sort of I feel like key as you redefine productivity, and never really appreciated that. And so very inspiring. And the second thing was it's been a reminder that I need to get Natalie and have this conversation.
Good. Well, I'm glad you grabbed a postcard. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm looking forward to sharing with our listeners more about your book and also the work that you're doing with Future 8 Thinking. But in true fashion here, I always like to start with an origin story. And so would you mind sharing where you're from and where you grew up?
Yes, I am from Philly. I'm from the northwest section of Philadelphia. I grew up in Mount Airy. I grew up in East Mount Airy. I now live, interestingly enough, just 7 minutes from where I grew up in West Mount Airy. And I grew up in a family of loving parents, a sister, a younger sister. We're just 20 months apart. I started out in Philly public schools at the Houston Elementary School, and then that was kindergarten through third grade. And then I went to Jenkintown Elementary School from fourth through sixth grade. And then I went to Germantown Friends School from seventh through 12th. And I just say all that because going to three very different sorts of schools really helped me cultivate my keen sense of observation. At every turn, there were different amazing gifts in those learning experiences, but also challenges. And I grew up learning how to be incredibly adaptive, especially because And the last two schools at Jenkintown and at Germantown Friends School, I was an ethnic minority. And also at GFS, the culture of learning was so different. In public school, I was an A student. I was excellent at filling out the worksheets and giving the teacher what she or he wanted. And then in this Quaker prep school, it was more about asking a different question, begging or asking for forgiveness, not permission. And that really cultivated in me a boldness in my thinking. Um, I also grew up studying dance, and I studied modern dance since age 4, Horton technique for any modern dance aficionados out there. And I was very athletic also growing up, which actually was a real asset in shifting schools so much because sports helps kids to bond and make friends a little bit more easily. And I was a nerd, and I still am a nerd. My happy place has always been in books, and actually, over the past 2 years, I've made a recommitment to fiction reading. In my work, and probably your work too, Raymond, we have to read a lot of nonfiction, and nonfiction is the way we keep up in our space. And in my case, I'm the author of nonfiction, but fiction is a place where I get to escape, where I can dream, where I'm learning now in terms of the neuroscience of that liminal space that fiction gets us into. It's so important for the nervous system, for calming down, for the role of dreaming and the imagination.
I appreciate that. I love that you shared your upbringing and how you went to these three different schools. It sounds like it was intentional. And I wrote down this word as I was preparing for today because I was looking at your background and sort of the path that you took throughout your career. And the word that I wrote was curiosity. And
Ah,
I feel like that foundation really opened you up to sort of that curiosity. But the boldness that you're describing is your ability to lean into the curiosity. And the second word I wrote that led to creativity, which I don't want to get to just yet, but it's almost like it's gives me goosebumps because how you just described your reading and around the nonfiction and fiction books. I feel like that curiosity really leads to that creativity and the boldness. So I feel like it's a perfect recipe there. What did your parents do for a living?
my mom was a stay-at-home mom up through around, I guess, when we were in late middle school for me, probably around up to around age 12 for me. My parents made an intentional choice for my mom to stay home. She's an artist. She was a weaver. I remember going to classes with her at Tyler School of the Arts, or her undergraduate degree is in French. She was a language major. She actually wanted to be an opera singer.
Oh, wow.
She had too much stage fright, the story goes, to make her audition at Oberlin Conservatory. She grew up in Pittsburgh, but she studied languages. Very she's an artist. Never was able to earn a living as an artist, but she really passed down to us the love of fiber arts and textiles and taught us to sew at a really young age. And then she became a secretary. This is the 80s. So if you remember Dolly Parton and 9 to 5, like this was the reality for women who were college educated, had stayed at home, and really hard to break into the job market and find work that was really meaningful. But she made the most of it and was an executive assistant to a top researcher at Merck, a pharmaceutical firm. My dad was like the hardest working man I knew. His main career was in pharmaceutical sales, but he was also a denturist. And denturists are skilled in making the appliances that go into the teeth, so retainers and dentures and those sorts of things. Um, and he also, to help get his daughters through private school, at one point was working at least 2 jobs. He had a firewood business. He dabbled in real estate, not too successfully, but he tried. But he was always figuring things out to make sure that he provided for us a really comfortable and just I think the word cozy just comes to mind when I think about the way that I grew up. And I grew up in a blue collar, like maybe lower middle class community. People, adults on my block were cops, secretaries, nurses. Um, we played on the street. The street was our, we didn't have a backyard, or on the stoop, as we say in Philly. And, grew up playing kickball and handball and hopscotch and double dutch
Mm,
so that was the work that my parents did for a living.
I love that. It sounds like you had a nice balance of arts through your mom and entrepreneurship and just real hardworking, strong work ethic with your dad. Um, and then you had the freedom as a kid to sort of just enjoy life and play. Like, I love that.
Well, I was talking to a new friend yesterday she and her husband have a younger child. They have a 9-year-old daughter who's in a very prestigious prep school and out in the main line. And she was saying how they had to basically check out of all of the overscheduling that her daughter's friends were doing. Like at age 7, kids are doing like two instruments, 2 sports, like even a short spring break is scheduled. There's now camp. I didn't even know that our daughter's 26. She's my stepdaughter. I don't remember like camps during spring break, but we were just talking about the need for figuring things out as a kid, the need to have that white space to do nothing. And I share with her that we learned very quickly not to go to our mom and say, "Mommy, I'm bored," because the few times we did, she would look at us and say, "Only boring people get bored."
Mm,
It was like this mom ninja trick. And we'd be like, okay, I'm not a boring person. So the response is basically like, scram, figure something out, entertain yourselves, I,
right.
there's no such thing as getting bored. If you are bored, it's an invitation. I now realize boredom is really an invitation to pause, to reframe, to think differently about things.
Mm, You got me thinking about my own kids and what I say when they are when they say I'm bored. So it's so interesting. You just taught me a few things that I'll have to apply next time my son is like, "Dad, I'm bored."
Only boring people get bored.
I love it. So, Natalie, when you think back, what did you want to be when you were a young girl?
Oh gosh, when I was a girl, in typical Libra fashion, I'm very indecisive. There were 3 things I rattled off. I wanted to be a writer, a nurse, and a dancer. And I think the reason I wanted to be a nurse is because I had one of these nurses kits, and I
Mm,
thought it was really cool. Interesting, I didn't say doctor. I said I wanted to be a nurse, but I have maintained the dance throughout my life, and I am a published author now, so those things have come true. Turned out in high school biology, when we had to start dissecting frogs and such, I realized that I'm not good with blood.
mm,
So the medical path ended there.
wow. So, what did you ultimately decide in terms of your career?
My career has been pretty windy and diverse. I have my grounding based on what I studied in college is cultural anthropology, and that way of thinking about humans and society and problem solving has been such a gift because cultural anthropology taught me to value the worm's eye view of society versus the bird's eye view of society, which I think is what you learn when you study things like economics or political science or history. But cultural anthropology really helps you to dive down, get onto the ground, understand through observation, interviewing, qualitative research methods from the people's perspective, not and always challenging your own assumptions. I was a middle school English teacher for 5 years in my 20s, which was arguably the best training for everything I've gone on to do because
Mm,
Being a middle school English teacher taught me to love learning. It taught me to have a sense of humor about myself. It taught me performance. It taught me um, how to um, translate. I think great teachers are really great translators. Because not everyone is going to understand why 1 + 1 = 2 in the same way. You have to be able to unpack it in a number of ways. I also started a hat design business in my 20s living in New York City. It was called Nat's Hats. And that was because I knew how to sew. I sewed my entire wardrobe during my first job of college because I couldn't afford anything to buy, and my friends encouraged me to start selling what I was making just from what they saw in my wardrobe, and that chapter really gave me the bug for business. Probably I got the bug for business even earlier than that, if I'm honest. My sister and I had a lemonade stand when we were, like, elementary school. I had a chocolate chip cookie business in high school for about 3 years in the school shop. So I really always had that entrepreneurial drive.
Wow, so much to unpack there. I love it. What I'd like to do is just have you sort of walk me through. You got this college degree in anthropology, and I wonder at the time when you reflect back, did you think that this degree would ultimately lead to this very sort of non-linear career path?
Yeah, it's like, what were you thinking? Studying anthropology. No, it's actually, it goes back to my parents because my parents sacrificed a lot for a very expensive education. I'm an alumna of Vassar College. It was incredible education. And in the fall semester of sophomore year, I don't know if it's still that way, but back then it was, we had to declare our major by like midway through first semester of sophomore year or second year. And I was terrified because I did not know what to major. I was in this really exclusive elite liberal arts college which was great because I love ideas and I love thinking and I love reading and exploring. But I was like, "Oh my gosh, everything that sounds impressive, I'm either failing at or is so boring to me, like economics or political science." So, I called home and I began in this meandering way to talk to my parents. This is in the days when there was a phone in the kitchen and a phone in the bedroom, and each of my parents was on each of those phones.
Mhm.
And I am explaining to them, I'm going through all the majors that I thought they would be impressed by. And I said, "Yes, I'm gonna have to choose soon." And I was thinking about economics, but I don't know. And then I was thinking about, and they said, "Okay, well, what do you like?" And I wouldn't answer the question. And I had just taken Anthro 101 and loved it. And I had been doing these courses in African studies, which is a multidisciplinary major where you actually ended up studying philosophy and economics and history and literature, but from, through the lens of the African diaspora. And finally, it was almost like a confessional. I said, "Well, I really love these classes I've been taking in anthropology. And oh my gosh, there's this whole department called Africana Studies, and I've been doing this and this." And almost at the same time, my parents said, "That's what you should study." And I said, "Wait, what?" You mean you'd be okay if I studied anthropology? And they said, "Yeah." And I said, maybe a double major with Africana studies?" And they said, "Yes." And my father said, "Natalie, if you study what you love, you will have to turn away opportunities." And it was like this weight just lifted off my shoulders. Now, I want you and your audience to understand what a radical statement and offer this was from two people, two African American parents in the 80s, where everyone was talking about study computers, to give their daughter permission to follow her heart with, I was not looking at a trust fund. I remember my graduation gift when I graduated from Vassar was like this pleather portfolio to put your resume in. They're like, "Congratulations, keep going." It wasn't like I didn't get a car. I didn't get like first 6 months of rent. I didn't, that was not where I came from.
Mm.
What I came from was to value education, to value your ideas, to value your chutzpah and your drive. And so when they told me that, it was like the biggest gift ever. And my father was right.
I love that. I love how your parents gave you that gift. I feel like when you were sitting there on that call and you had to kind of lean in and share like really what you wanted to do in your heart of hearts, and you probably knew in the back of your mind that your parents were going to support you, but still the fear of sharing like this is what I want is like such a life lesson, because at that moment you took ownership in for your identity and who you wanted to be. And when I think about like this degree of anthropology and where you ultimately ended, you didn't necessarily knew like how this was going to be like 5 years from now. You just knew in that moment you loved this course, you loved this degree, and to get that support from your parents.
I didn't want to disappoint them.
Mm,
But you are right when you say I was claiming this is what I want to do, which is actually at that age in human development, that's a big part of what we're supposed to do. We're supposed to all of a sudden be able to break away from the parents and how they've been molding us, be able to say, but this is what matters to me. And I was scared to share that because I didn't know if they would say, uh, oh, that's all nice and well, but how are you gonna get a job? Because that's what I was thinking. I was thinking like, how am I gonna get a job at the end of this?
mm,
But I was, I was fine. I've always been fine. But it was to their credit a great example of their parenting skills and their demonstration of their curiosity about me and who I was becoming.
mm. So you talked about the job, um, and I know you took a job abroad. So tell me about how you leaped from being graduating from Vassar in anthropology to immersing yourself in the fashion industry and moving halfway across the world for a job opportunity.
Well, immersing myself in fashion really came out of need. It came out of starting Nat's Hats, which was the only reason I started Nat's Hats was because I was sewing my entire wardrobe because I couldn't afford to buy the pretty frocks and the display windows in Manhattan. So, um, again, it was following my heart. It was following those breadcrumbs. And I remember leaving 5 years of being a middle school English teacher, having done Nat's Hats for 3 years. It was never profitable, to be quite honest. It was never a profitable business, but man, did I learn so much. And it gave me this bug for business, leaving teaching, middle school English teaching, entering this graduate program to I cannot begin to explain how challenging and hard it was to craft the story for others about why it would make sense to hire me, someone who had middling experience in the fashion industry, only this entrepreneurial venture of Nat's Hats, middle school English teacher. Okay, you did this master's degree in textile marketing, but most people who make their way up in fashion, they don't have advanced degrees in fashion. They earn their credibility and their skill on the job. So it was a very hard story to craft. And that's where I really learned the value of story and how at every turn when you're trying to make a leap, you have to be able to succinctly and clearly in a compelling way share why this trajectory makes sense and how it's going to help you, the future employer. So, in that chapter, after I graduated from the master's degree program, before I got the job from Mast Industries, this division of the limited brands, I was unemployed for about 6 months and I was working temp jobs and living at home and thinking, oh my God, I made the biggest mistake ever. And I'd be going on interviews, I'd be sending out my resume, I was using my network. And I remember that I think Jim is now still the president of Mass Industries, which broke away from Limited. But Jim Schwartz was ended up being my boss, and he interviewed me for the opportunity at Mass Industries. I'm talking about Nat's hats, and he leans back and he looks at me. He goes, "So, was that ever profitable?" He said, "How profitable was your business?" And I said, "It was never profitable." And he smiles at me and he goes, "Good, because I wouldn't have believed you if you told me it was." And I thought to myself, I think I got the job because I was honest. I shared, what I learned and what I brought to the table. But that experience really came out. Here's another thing I will say. During that interview process, when people ask me, so you just graduated this master's degree program, what are you doing now? And when I would tell them I was temping, I think it really also showed my work ethic. It showed that I wasn't just sitting at home waiting for the dream job to fall into my lap. I was out there working secretarial jobs, assistant to the executive assistant, doing whatever I could to stay in the mix, to keep my spirits up, to keep going out there and be able to tell people I am working. It's not the job of my choice right now, but I am working. I think that says a lot to people
Mhm.
when we are in these transition times. It shows humility, it shows work ethic, all those things.
Mhm. Yeah, I love that. I think your you had like multiple things happening, and I have to say I just love the honesty in your business, because I feel like, kids who are sort of making their mark and finding their way, who have a dream to start their own business, the creative process that goes into that. You're building out your product, but the idea of taking it to market and actually making a business out of it is the hardest thing that you can do,
It's so
because
hard.
market acceptance and, you know, how much does it cost to make a product versus what you're selling it for? There's so much that goes into that. And so I love your authenticity and your honesty, which ultimately, that honesty led to a job offer, which is really cool.
Yeah. Yeah.
So tell me about this work abroad, and how long did you work, and I know you came back. What was the experience like that sort of set you up for the next big thing?
Yeah, all in, I was abroad for about 18 months in both countries, and I was very reticent to move to Sri Lanka because there was a civil war going on.
Mm,
And I had already studied in Tel Aviv, Israel, where there wasn't a war going on, but at the time Saddam Hussein was threatening to bomb every other day. And I was in an environment where you went to the supermarket, you opened your handbag or your knapsack to check for bombs. When you went to the movies ended halfway. They would evacuate the building to check for. I mean, that was the environment in Israel. And so while and it also is never as bad as on CNN. I mean, people figure out how to make a new normal during those very stressful times. But Sri Lanka was going through a civil war that had been going on for a very long time. And it was a civil war that was really kind of focused in the north part of the country. It was interesting. I was living in Colombo in the southern part of the country. Um, South central part of the country, where there were military checkpoints, where there were times you go into the supermarket and there wasn't a particular item you needed because of, delays and all that sort of thing. But living in Sri Lanka was such a gift. It is a beautiful country, beautiful, genteel people. Some of the smartest people I've ever worked with were in the factories and on the production teams. My colleagues there. I write about this in Move, Think, Rest. You know, when we went to lunch as a team, like you went to lunch, like people took out their tiffins that they brought from home and we talked and laughed and relaxed and ate lunch, and then we went
mm,
back to work and follow through on production orders, that sort of thing. It was an opportunity to visit mills and dye houses and factories and be on the ground. There was a small point where I went to group of factories that was on one of the islands in the Maldives in the middle of the Indian Ocean, which was just so incredible. Um, So it really just was it made me fall in love with Sri Lankan culture, with Southeast Asia. And when you live and work abroad, you learn so much about yourself. I never felt in all the cases when I've lived abroad, I never felt more American in my life. Then I moved to Porto, Portugal. I already knew Portuguese, so I studied abroad in Brazil and also made great friends, and learned a very different way that the business ran because um, the factory system was a little different in Portugal. So I think anyone who has an opportunity to work abroad as an expat, to study abroad, do it because it doesn't matter how long you're there. It just gives you a perspective and a confidence and a curiosity and appreciation for people who are different from you, to understand how similar we all are. I reached out to one of my friends recently who is Sri Lankan, just given this war that we are in and the impact it's had on a tiny little country like Sri Lanka, which has had no role in this. They already have rations on gasoline and fuel,
Mm,
and you just have it's a more it gets personal, right? It's not abstract. It's not the people over there. It's more personal. It's more relatable. It helps you to think through choices in a much more intentional way. At least it has helped me to do that.
yeah. Well, what came to mind when you were describing your time in Sri Lanka and Brazil, it made me think about your anthropology degree and how you sort of describe the worm view, because, in really immersing yourself in culture, you sort of had the theory of anthropology, and then now you have this gift to study abroad, working for one of the largest brands in the world, and you are immersing yourself in these cultures that probably gave you a real appreciation for your studies. And so it's sort of, I love the thread that kind of goes through your career, that connects back to points in your life that make things really connect and make sense. So um
But can I also add that the culture anthropology has also come into play with just building consumer insight.
mhm,
More increasingly, more companies are hiring anthropologists because of the way anthropologists think through problems and the ways that they think through from the perspective of others being your clients, your customers. So when you think about something like design thinking, for example, design thinking, 50% of it is qualitative research, which is what anthropologists do. And the other 50% is the application of design principles like visualizing data and prototyping. It's this mashup of those two areas. So that's the other ways that anthropology
mhm,
became very relevant to how I do my work.
mhm. I love that. So Natalie, take me to the moment where you sort of had the epiphany that led to you launching Figure Eight Thinking. And how did you sort of know that it was time for you to take the leap of faith and start something new?
Um, what happened to me was I was burning out, and I didn't know I was burning out. It's one thing to start to burn out when when you're like dragging your feet into work every day. You don't love what you do. It's become kind of a chore. I loved what I was doing as a professor, as the director of the Strategic Design MBA program, but I was also burning the candle from both ends. And in order to scale and build the program, I needed help. And so my pillow talk from my husband, John, is negotiating for yourself. John is an executive compensation attorney. So he was like, well, you know what you need to do. You need to ask for more. And so I put together a proposal. I asked for more. At the time, the university was going through a merger, which I was unaware of. And so, this strategic design and behavior was not their priority. And so while I had um, administrators who really loved the work of the MBA program, the work I was doing, it wasn't a priority for them. So they'd be like, well, not yet. And as John explained to me, your answers will either be yes, no, or not yet. And not yet is a soft no. So you
Hmm.
got to be ready to like think about what else you might do. And I was just devastated because I thought, what else could I do? Because like I had blinders on. I wasn't actually really thinking that this side hustle called figure eight thing could really be a thing, even though unbeknownst to me, I was really prototyping. I was really developing proof of concept. I had a small cadre of clients. I had evidence that I did great work in this area. So it was this confluence of wanting to do work that needed greater support at my current employer and then not being able to support me in that way. And then having this other thing which I could possibly grow. And I remember I spent the summer of 2016. I gave myself a week-long personal retreat at a friend's home. She has a beautiful home. She has a beautiful home in Chincoteague in Virginia. And every day I would journal, cry, go through these like prompts, cry, rinse, repeat, go to lunch with her, come back, journal. And then the week, I wasn't really sure what had shifted, if anything had changed, but I knew that I was going to step down as the director. I thought I would just go on as a professor, but not direct the program. And then through a confluence of other events, decided, no, I think I actually want to make a go of figure eight thinking. So my body actually told me I needed to pause and reassess because my burnout moment was before that summer of self-evaluation. It was the spring, and I'm walking down the hallway at like 5:15 with a armful of 11 more papers to grade, 2 more recruiting calls to make, gonna be late for dinner again. And I heard myself say out loud through clenched teeth, I don't want to do this. And I was like, uh-oh. I couldn't even contain the voice anymore. It just like surfaced and it was very terse and tense. And that was this, I mean, hard to
Hmm.
ignore that. I mean, a lot of people do, right? They're like, no, 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 carry on. Well, that
Right.
was nothing to see here. But I was like, oh no. Going back to the advice of my parents, follow your heart, do what you love. And it's easier said than done, right? Because there's the knowing that it's time to shift. The how is the process of trust, of putting one foot in front of the other. Try this thing, ask for a coffee with this person, try the next thing, ask for help in this, go to this webinar or conference, have this conversation, launch this
Mm.
experiment, build proof of concept. That's how it goes. It's not something that magically you just do. You have to do the work of what I call rigor, of really testing it out. But the seed of it is the wonder of like, what if I could still do that? And that was my what if question. My what if question was, what if I could still do all the things I love about teaching, but he just wasn't called a professor anymore. And that was the beginning of what I do now.
Wow. I love how you were intentional about taking time away and sort of removing yourself and giving yourself space to journal, to be emotional, to really listen to your body. And, just going through that process really, I believe, validates the decision and the pathway forward. And I feel like that's so relatable for people who have sort of gone through or even are at a place today where they're experiencing that voice and those questions about the fulfillment that you're getting today and what you're missing. And so I really appreciate you sort of being vulnerable and kind of taking us through that journey. So tell me about figure eight thinking. Like what are you doing in the work that you're delivering today?
Well, three major things. I'm a global keynote speaker and I talk to a range of sectors. I'm pretty agnostic in terms of the sectors. The consistent through line is people hire me to speak at their all hands events, at their conferences, at their convenience, because I give them a fresh take on future work, leadership, productivity. So my speaking is one of the things I do through figure thinking. I'm an author of 3 books, a book I edited on design thinking, 2 award-winning books, one called The Creativity Leap, which actually is coming out with a second edition on June 30th of 2026.
Nice.
And then Move, Think, Rest, which is when you and I met, that came out in September of 2025. And I'm also beginning to launch my own events. So I'm having the first Leap Lab. So the events are called Leap Labs. Will be on May 22nd in Philadelphia. It's a private mastermind. And the Leap Labs have different iterations. Sometimes the Leap Labs are with executive leadership teams, they're curated dinner salons. And what I'm really helping people to do is go from ambiguity to clarity, is to help them identify a new way to reframe the problem that they've been staring at, a new question to ask, and an experiment to launch. So that's the goal, is to leave with an experiment that you will launch to test out this new opportunity, this to go from stuckness to clarity.
Hmm.
And I do all that through, so that's where the plane lands for
I
people.
love it.
My secret sauce, though, is something I've developed called the Wonder Rigor methodology. But yeah, so it's through my speaking, the Leap Labs, through my books, and really the goal is to help organizations, teams, individuals build creative capacity so they can consistently innovate and drive purpose-driven results.
Mm. That's amazing. I love it. So Natalie, I wrote down 4 words here, and as we're wrapping up, I want to share this with you and just tell me how it resonates. So I feel like your career has connected to sort of 4 themes, which is anthropology, understanding people, fashion, understanding expression, dance, understanding movement, and consulting, helping companies think differently.
Yeah.
And I feel like that's like a culmination of your career, your life, and ultimately could be your legacy in terms of how you're bringing all of these sort of themes together to impact the world. I know it's a very big and bold statement, but that's sort of how your career has connected with me.
Wow. What a gift to hear that reflected back to me. Thank you. I love that. I hope that is my legacy. That would be everything. I mean, I always say the mission in my work is to change lives with ideas, and then drilling it down more specifically, it's by building that knowledge and understanding of creativity beyond what we might traditionally think of as art only, but that wonder and rigor toggling.
Mhm.
Thank you.
Yeah, I love this conversation. Any advice to people who are sort of are at that moment that they're sort of contemplating the doing something new, and they're sitting in that place where they're not fulfilled. They're getting to the breaking point. Like they're experiencing the symptoms that you just described, where the burnout is becoming real, and they're paying the masking tax because they're just masking those and they're suppressing those feelings. But they know in their heart of hearts, like there's something bigger on the other side, but they just don't have the courage isn't the right word, but they're afraid to make that decision, that choice, to make the leap of faith.
Well, very concretely, they should stay in touch with me. They should think about attending a future Leap Lab, or maybe the one on May 22nd in Philly. But more broadly, my advice is that when you feel 50% terrified and 50% exhilarated, then that's when you should leap,
Mm,
because the terror grounds you. It ensures that you dot your I's and cross your T's. The exhilaration keeps you buoyant and optimistic and hopeful. If you're too terrified, you're not ready because you won't you'll overanalyze things and you won't get any traction. If you're too exhilarated, you're not ready yet either because you need the grounding to make sure that you've got some sort of plan in place. So that's one overall piece of advice: 50-50 feeling of exhilaration and terror. But the other piece is like, start launching experiments. Because
Mm,
sometimes we think, oh, that shiny object over there, that's what I want to be doing. How do you know that? Well, just what's a version of that you could try,
right.
right? And that's really what I'm taking people through in these leap labs, so you can experiment that. And for me, that little side hustle called figure eight thinking was that proof of concept. Again, I had no idea that I was going to be at this crossroads seriously contemplating leaving academia when I thought I've always wanted to be a professor. That's what I want to do. Um, so that's what my advice would be, is
Mm,
to uh, launch some experiments and do a check-in around the balance of your terror and exhilaration.
mm. I love it. I love that. Natalie, it's been just such a delight. I really appreciate our conversation here. I've picked up so many nuggets, and I know so many people will take what you shared to heart and create action. I'm going to share all of your information in our show notes, your books, your website, your LinkedIn profile, so people will know how to find you. And thanks again. I know you're really busy, and just really appreciate carving out time here and sharing your story.
Thank you so much, Raymond. I really appreciate the interest and the time.
Thank you. And thanks everyone for listening. Until next time. Hello, everyone. It's Raymond again here. I want to take a moment to say a special thanks to our sponsor, Career Minds. They're a global provider of career transition and career development solutions. And if you'd like to hear more on Clocking Out, we'd love for you to take a second and click follow of your favorite podcast app. And while you're there, leave us a rating or review. It really helps new listeners find the show. You can also watch the full episode on YouTube. Just search Clocking Out with Raymond Lee and hit subscribe. And if you're listening on Spotify, don't forget to check out our episode polls or just drop us a comment. We'd love to hear your thoughts. Finally, if you or someone you know has a story to share about navigating change, taking a risk, or rethinking your career, we want to hear from you. Head to the link in our show notes and fill out the form to be considered for a future episode. Until next time, remember, if you're just sitting there thinking that you're stuck or you're unsure of your career or future and you think it's time for a change, I would encourage yourself to ask these 3 questions. Does my career or work make me feel alive? Am I doing the things that genuinely matter to me most? Am I creating value for myself and for others? Until next time.